So I like to spend the next couple of minutes talking about a question I get asked quite a bit, usually when the application season comes around, and that is often August, September kind of time. And that is when students need to really decide which universities they want to apply to. So usually, if I was to talk to a student the year prior, year 12, and I asked them, well, which medical school, dental school you'd be interested in, normally they have a very specific list or maybe just one in mind. And often in the same city they live in, same state, and that's because you don't want to travel too far away from your family. That's often the reason. But it's often the case that after UCAT is finished, and that's in the month of July, people are just happy to go anywhere. I think that's just testament to how much preparation went into UCAT, and how much, I guess, they really don't want to do it again in the following year to reapply anywhere else. And, year 12 being a difficult year already, they're happy to just get in somewhere. So I want to really quickly talk about, well, what goes into making a university a good medical or dental school, and what has gone into considering when a university or program isn't as good. So, what makes a good med school? That's really the question I'm here to answer. And long story short, cutting to the very, very end of it, is that at the very, very, very end, I do not believe, right, that the med school or dent school that you go into and receive training and education from is going to play a large part in job opportunities. I really do not feel that's the case. And the reason is because every medical and dental program, for them to issue out a graduation certificate, needs to be formally accredited. And the process of getting accredited by the accreditation body for the medical schools to produce a program, okay, that holds the desirable standard of excellence and competency for these doctors or dentists of the future to practice successfully is extremely tough. Constantly, there are what we call audits, reviews of the program, how one part of the program links to another, links to another, links to another, and also looking at how programs change over time and how it's actually in tune with the needs of the modern community. So you can imagine with technology improvements, with a lot of different things such as globalization, such as the fact that communities now are much more multicultural, and within every culture, people have different values, behaviors, even different genetic predispositions. It's very, very important for the programs nowadays to be very inclusive of all these variables. So as long as a medical school and dental school is accredited, which they would be, they will produce competent individuals. But a lot of people buy into the fact that certain universities have like a better name or better ranking, okay, to the university name. And that's often what we call this thing called QS rankings. So if you really look into this QS ranking thing, it really is more focused on the publications and the research output, which is primarily due to the funding that these universities get, if they are more of that type of research-heavy type uni. Do not be confused with this ranking to that of the teaching quality and how updated the course is. I don't think there's actually really any connection to a meaningful extent. So at the end of the day, what is a good uni? Well, there's a few factors to consider. So if I said they're all going to basically create doctors and dentists that are equally competent, then what are some other variables that can help you decide? Well, let's talk about the universities first, and then let's talk about other factors. So one thing is this, is that some universities have a program where they start you on clinical runs or exposures really, really, really early. Okay, as meaning in the first year, you start going to the hospitals. So from that, you get much more of a practical experience exposure from the get-go. And you can kind of see how what you're going to be learning will be applied in the actual working environment with patients. And that's when you're learning very much on the fly, hands-on learning. Whereas some medical schools focuses on getting your academics up to scratch first, and then later on, maybe in third or fourth year, okay, you start doing your clinical exposure. So there are merits to both, for sure. But then again, it comes down to what you prefer yourself. And often than not, I think it's a very good idea, besides just checking out the actual program details. And it's another thing that you should probably know for your interview anyway, that certain programs focus on certain outcomes more or in a different way than others. Sometimes you have different ways in which things are learnt or taught. Some universities prefer a more traditional lecturing style. Some universities involve more of a small group problem-solving style. And really, it's about whatever program will help you get the most out of the time that you're there. Because ultimately, that's what you bring to the workforce. Okay, what you've learned and what you've actually developed. So it's more about the outcomes of what you're able to achieve through a particular uni program according to your learning needs and learning behaviors, as opposed to just, hey, look, if you graduate from this uni that is higher ranked than this uni, you're definitely going to be better. Look, at the end of the day, when choosing doctors in specialty, for certain specialty training, it comes down to picking someone who is more suited, more competent, more experienced, more qualified than someone else. And often that actually only comes about after you start working, after you start really committing yourself to being a doctor in that environment. And before that, as a medical student, well, there's a lot of things you still can't do, right? There are a lot of procedures that you can't do. You can't sign off, okay, because you're not registered. And even then, the first few years of practicing is about getting that official registration as well. So a lot of it actually comes down to after you graduate, okay, and what you do in those first few years. What interests you have, how do you commit yourself? Do you want to spend more time following a certain department? Do you want to start doing more research in the area so that when you apply for a specialty, especially if it's competitive, you've got the necessary components to back you up to say that I'm not only keen, but I'm very, very capable. And I've got a lot of experience already with this department who wants to pick me up. So from a, university program perspective, it's more about matching your needs and everything else, which means you got to know your needs. And like I said before, instead of just looking at the university website for information, some websites have a lot more information than others. I would actually call a program coordinator up for the medical and dental program. Actually ask them about what makes this program stand out in their ways. And from that, you can gather and see whether or not you enjoy this program. Right. Some people I've talked to, because they've done that, really, really enjoy their program and they just absolutely in love with it. Some people haven't done that and they wish they had. So it's a different experience. But other factors you might want to consider, the length of the program. So some programs are as short as 5 years. Okay, so for example, Monash is 5 years. The JMP, Joint Medical Program, that's between Newcastle and New England, is 5 years. If you basically don't know how long a program is, you can check out our handbook via the download below about the length of programs and all that. So comparing a 5-year to a 6-year to even a 7-year program, obviously 5 to 7, there's 2 years difference. And, students tend to be relatively easygoing at the moment in terms of, 5, 7, doesn't matter, okay? And I'll rather go to a medical school that, for example, is closer to home or my friends are going to. But if you think about it, 2 years is a big difference when it comes down to what you're sacrificing for those extra 2 years, right? Or what you're gaining for those extra 2 years. So certain programs are longer because they require you to do an undergraduate first. Okay, so these programs are typically what we call provisional entry programs, meaning that you will be studying medicine from the 4th year onwards, but you have to do an undergraduate first. And there may be a recommended course that you do before that, either in, let's say, science, or maybe, in some cases, University of Sydney, arts, or there is no real choice. There's all the choices, you can pick whatever you like, but you have to actually maintain a certain grade point average, a result consistently. And it's not some ultra high result, but it is difficult enough for you to need to actually constantly study. So that if you're actually able to sustain that for the whole 3 years, then you get into medicine, okay, technically speaking. But if you don't achieve that threshold for those 3 years, you don't enter into first year medicine in the 4th year of the 7-year degree. So for some people, that's very stressful. For some people, it isn't. So again, that's something you're going to consider. Whereas for the 5 and 6 year programs, they are straight in medicine. Okay, so you start medicine day one and you go through that process. So, however, on paper, it's 2 extra years. So 2 extra years means 2 years of extra fees. So however much that may cost, I would say $10,000 to $12,000, 2 extra years, right? So that's around $20,000. And also, if you, let's say, graduated from a 5-year degree, and then your friends graduated from a 7-year degree, although you were classmates back in high school, it means that you are quite literally 2 years ahead of them in terms of having 2 years additional clinical experience. So you would actually, in that respect, be their seniors, if you want to think about that. And also, if you were to look at the average income, okay, of a young doctor, you're looking around maybe $80,000, depending on the kind of things you do. But let's say $80,000 for 2 years. That's what you also be giving up. So a lot more effort tends to be focused on what you do after you get out of med school and developing a career, as opposed to be during med school. So that's another factor to consider. Another factor to consider is that I get asked about a lot, and there tends to be a lot of confusion, is the different names of the degrees. So in New Zealand, the degree is called MBCHB, okay? In Australia, it's called MBBS or MD. So there's 3 degrees that are floating around, okay? MBCHB, MBBS, or MD. So what is the main difference between these 3? Well, MBCHB and MBBS technically is a bachelor's degree, whereas MD is technically, seen as more of a research-heavy master's level degree. Does it really make a huge difference though? The short answer is no, and I'll explain why. So some universities, for them to go from the MBBS, so just to put it out there, MBCHB and MBBS has always been around. Okay, since, I wouldn't say in the beginning of time, but since a long time ago. And it wasn't only until somewhat recently, in the last 10 years, did some universities start shifting from the MBBS to the MD program. But the reality is this, is that people think, oh, MD, it's more of an internationally recognized name, it must be better. Some of these universities changed with very minimal changes, or almost no changes in their existing program. So it means that the type of things they do in that program already satisfies the criteria from ND. Whereas some universities had to change a little bit more. But the reality is this, at the end of the day, unless you had a really, really strong focus in research, which MD programs typically will provide more of that to you, but at the same time, I know some MBBS programs that maybe have not switched quite yet, but maybe they'll be switching very, very shortly, because from what I can see, they still have a research-heavy component. In some cases, maybe even more research-heavy than existing MD programs. So you got to actually understand that just because you get an MD in places like New Zealand, Australia, it doesn't mean that you're automatically a better doctor, because from the pure clinical components and ability to practice, you're still the same. And if you want to get further research experience, you can always find that yourself. Universities often give a lot of opportunities for students to spend, summers or during the actual semesters to tag on, maybe like a professor here, a professor there, regarding certain biomedical and medical research topics, clinical stuff. So that means you can actually gain your experience from there onwards as well. But I've definitely known plenty of MBBS and MBCHB graduates who ended up doing extensive research, proving themselves in the ways they want to, and getting to specialties over MD students. But likewise, there are MD students who also do really good. So the general rule of thumb is to not let these, names of degrees qualify you as to what value you're able to provide to the workplace, but more so look at each of these things as opportunities, whether or not the university offers this. So you shouldn't just have a blanket idea that MDs are better than MBCHBs or MBBSs. You need to do your research, but most importantly, you got to figure out what you want out of a degree first, and that's going through some careful reflection, maybe asking friends about what their goals were when going through med school and what they wish they had. Sometimes I get students who tell me, they go, oh, my friend is at this university and they're doing this program, they have that, oh, I'd rather do that instead. Right, those are the kind of questions that you're going to figure out. And usually don't ask like first year, not a second year, maybe ask for like a third or fourth or fifth year later on the track, as if they are now advising their younger self what to look out for. So these kind of practical strategies would be very, very useful for you to go into and research on, so you can be absolutely sure that the universities you're applying to are the universities you're going to be happy studying in.